Alright family, first of all, when Donald Trump launched strikes on Iran, his goal was simple: shock the regime and force it to back down and restore Americans' interest in the Middle East. But instead, something strange happens. Iranians immediately didn't shut down the Strait of Hormuz. They turned it into a toll route. Oil tankers can still pass, but many of them have to pay in Chinese yuan, which raises these questions. Did the war meant to protect the dollar or defend it? Now, listen to me very carefully. Before you think this is just another Middle East war story, that is far from the real agenda. Whatever that happens in the Strait of Hormuz is not just about Iran and America. It's about the financial system that kept the US dollar at the center of a global trade for 50 years. And the man who cracked this open is the same man that said he was going to stop war.
He will start a war. I'm not going to start a war. I'm going to stop wars.
Alright, I hope by the end of this analysis, you will realize how this war in the Middle East could reshape how energy is priced globally and what that means specifically for African countries still paying their import bills in currency that they have no knowledge about its creation. Now let's look at this in 1973. At that time, the US has just abandoned the gold standard.
I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold.
This means the dollar was no longer backed by anything physical, but just trust. So the president struck a deal with Saudi Arabia. America provides military backing and politically protection of Saudi royals. And in return, Saudi Arabia and all of OPEC agrees to sell oil exclusively in dollars. Now, just think about what they actually mean. Every country on earth that needed oil have to hold dollars first. America could fund wars, print money, brought deficits because the world was always buying its currency just to keep its lights on. You see, that deal held for 50 years, not because every country loved it. It was because nobody had the leverage to break it until now. Or maybe, look, Iran controls the northern coastline of Hormuz. For decades, they have threatened to close it if pushed too hard. Most analysts assume it was a bluff. Then the US and Israel launched a strike into Iranian territory in early 2026. And Iran also responded, not by closing the Strait of Hormuz completely, but by doing something far more calculated. Iran kept the Strait of Hormuz only opens for tankers paying in Chinese yuan. You see, according to CNBC, Iran has already shipped 11 to 12 million barrels of oil to China since the war began. That oil straight through the Strait of Hormuz that they claim was closed. Now, look at it in this way. When you are in a conflict with a neighbor and you have owned the only route that leads to a strait, you don't block that route completely. Instead, you say anyone can still pass, but they have to pay in my other neighbor currency, but not yours. That is not blockage. That is currency coup disguised as trans policies. Now, Trump and Israel launched a sustained strike against Iran in early 2026, targeting IRCG facilities and military infrastructures. Their logic: shock, fast degradation, and putting pressure. Don't be surprised. The same old playbook 3 times. But here is what is genuinely different about Iran. Iran has 90 million people, more than 3 times pre-invasion Iraq. Its terrain is mountainous and brutal for any invading forces. Its military has been under sanctions for 40 years and has spent each one of those years figuring out if they can fight a superpower without matching its weapons for weapons. You don't do that for decades and still be unprepared. Now, let's be honest. What are Trump's options? Number 1, more strikes. Let's keep US casualty low for now. But every strike risks another headlines, like what happens at the Gear School near Mina. Number 2, another showdown in the Strait of Hormuz. First tankers through. But the problem is Iran has mines, drones boats. So one incident and it will be a completely different war. But China quietly gotten yuan deals for Iranian oil that finds itself in the crossfire. Number 3, a quiet off-front. Just declares a limited objectives, met pivot to sanctions. Iran's government survives and claims victory, but the yuan-Hormuz agreement stays in place. Number 4, this is what nobody wants to talk about, but on the grounds, military analysts describe 3 invasion corridor into Iran. This western axis through Iraq towards Tehran, a southern amphibious assault around the Persian Gulf coast, and northern approach working with ethnic minority inside Iran. All 3 are strategically punishing. Maintenance terrorists prepares defenders, an army that studies these exact scenarios for 40 years. The bottom line is a ground invasion would likely requires hundreds of thousands of troops, and that will almost put them in national insurgency. Which, if you have been honest, like what experts say will never happen in Afghanistan. Brown University Cost of War project puts the total bill of post 9/11 wars, Iraq, Afghanistan, at over $8 trillion. $8 trillion, 929,000 lives lost. The Taliban are back in Kabul. Libya is a first state now with a weapon flowing into the Sahel. And Iran is bigger, more populated, and much prepared than all three combined. Now look at this. There is also a player in the whole story nobody keeps mentioning, even in the Western headlines, barely. But if you follow the money, the oil, they are everywhere. Well, China, or the world banks, Reuters reports that China is in an active talks with Iran to secure the safe passage for its oil and gas flow through the Hormuz in yuan. Now think about what structure China has just pulled out here. Without firing a single shot, Iran restricts Hormuz to dollar-dominated oil. China gets its special pass. The yuan becomes a currency of recourse at one of the most strategic choke points on the planet. Beijing now positions itself as the only power that unlocks global energy flows, extractions, political and economic concession from anyone who needs the oil to move. The South China Morning Post noted that some analysts in China are urging caution, but a total shutdown of Hormuz also affect China too. Now, the yuan-for-Hormuz signal has opened up conversations that seemingly was not possible before this war. What if the petrodollar wasn't actually mandatory? You can bomb a missile site, but you can't bomb a currency arrangement. Now, Africa pays the bill. This is what happens if you are Africa country in 2026. What happens in far land without the continent's consent? Decisions were made in rooms that our leaders were not even invited. But somehow, the meeting bills arrives at our doors before the notes arrive. Iran restricts the Strait of Hormuz and the oil price sparks. EU Commission President van der Leyen told the European Parliament that in the first 10 days of the conflict, EU prices rose roughly to 50%. Oil prices to 27%, costing European taxpayers around 3 billion euros in extra import costs. In just 10 days, 3 billion euros in just 10 days in Europe, the wealthier continent with diversity energy sources and strong fiscal buffers. Now ask yourself, what would 20% of oil spike do to Ghana, Kenya and Senegal? These are four importing economies. You see, when oil rises, fertilizer rises because fertilizers are made from petroleum products. When fertilizers rises, food production cost also rises. And in countries where families already spend 60% of their income on food, that is not an economic inconvenience, but hunger. You see, there is a lot at play here too. If the yuan-for-Hormuz arrangement hardens into permanent structure, it reshapes the currency infrastructure of global energy. Africa countries that price oil export in dollars, borrowing dollars and pay import bills in dollars, they find themselves in a world where that dollar dependence carried new vulnerability they have no part in creating. But let's check the other side to this also. Nigeria, Angola, Algeria, most are these new emerging gas sectors, a sustaining period of high prices that increase revenue short term. Now, I think the question African strategists should be asking right now is not whether it affects us. Of course, it affects us. Africa countries developing new energy assets have the window right now to decide how those assets get priced and in what currency they get paid. Now, let's break this together. Iran made a move that nobody fully priced oil by tying Hormuz to yuan. They give China a structure win that handed the petrodollar its biggest stress since 1973 and put Trump in a position where every option cost him politically or militarily or both. And it landed on African wallet before most African governments even formed response. Now, what is this moment actually revealing is simpler, that all the geopolitics, the rules that seem permanent, are renegotiated not at a summit in real times through conflict and strategic desperation. Power is fragmenting, and in that fragmentation, there are still gaps where countries that have always been told to follow can actually start to lead, if they are paying attention and willing to move. You see, every player in this story is actually making a short-term versus long-term calculation, and some of them are making it badly. Now, the lesson for Africa is this: we cannot afford to be surprised by this event because we are never in the rooms where they have decided. That means we have to get better in reading the signals earlier enough, building energy dependence, diversifying trade currency, and negotiating from our own portion of the strength, not reacting to someone else's portion of weakness. Senegal and Mozambique are sitting on significant gas reserves. Nigeria anchors the African oil economies. Algeria has real leverages in European energy supply, and all these are not small cars. The question is, who is holding them? You see, that is not the rhetorical question. The homework should be done by all Africans. Find out how your country currently prices its energy, what currency, what benchmarks, what leverage it has or not, because the conversation that has just started in the Strait of Hormuz is heading to every Africa economy. Now guys, what are you thinking about this after listening to all the analysis? What do you think? What do you think is going to happen to Africa if this continues to escalate? Whatever you think, drop your opinion in the comment section. Thank you for watching this channel.